Hello there, this is Sohail Hasni, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Hi, Grant, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sahel. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Finally, I'm on the same time zone. You're in Melbourne, I'm in Sydney, right?
Yes, I think when we first started discussing, we were in all different parts of the world.
Yes. Maybe let's get an introduction, who you are, what we want to learn from you.
Yeah, for sure. I've been working in the electric vehicle, more so electric truck space for a number of years. And I have a background in the transport industry with trucks and trailers. A very long time ago, I was involved in forklifts with a battery electric. So the battery electric products have been out there in business for 40 plus years with forklifts well before cars and trucks. So I got an interest in the whole EV world because I thought it was an exciting direction that the world's taking. I won't get into all the climate issues and all that. People are well versed on that and everyone has different opinions. But I think with the electric truck space, it's an interesting one. It's very different to what we call the EV passenger car space and what people use as consumers. So that's a bit about me.
That's interesting. So you started from the large forklifts. I mean, yes, of course, they're very heavy and they were using lead acid batteries, right?
Yeah, they still do, right? You talk about range and time you can use a product. Forklifts I go back to the 70s, late 70s. Forklifts have been able to be driven all day in a warehouse, basically on one charge, a lead acid traction battery. They had a pretty simple 8 or 12-hour charges. Some of the big distribution centres like Woolworths or Coles in Australia, they'd have battery rooms and they'd do second shift battery changes. And so it's pretty normal in that industry. I don't think there's any stats anymore. Engine-powered forklifts like LPG-powered or diesel compared to electric. There's probably more electric sold in forklifts and material handling anyway. You look at all those famous brands like Crown forklifts and Toyota forklifts and BT. They all make battery electric forklifts and some of them are just 100%. So it's an interesting technology. It's been around a long time. It's obviously a lot more refined today in the EV space. We saw with the Nissan Leaf many years ago. So in the truck space, it's probably only really been out there in the last 6-7 years, maybe in any meaningful way where they're being put on the road in the, maybe 2016, 17, we saw it in China. More so, a few of the Europeans were getting into that space.
So these are large trucks, not a semi-trailer, but that sits in the middle. Same size.
The technology is being ramped. If you go upwards from passenger vehicles to commercial vehicles like vans, and then you get globally light trucks, medium trucks, and heavy trucks. Certain markets like Australia, we have a clear distinction based on GVM, gross vehicle mass of light, medium, and heavy. And in Europe, they have basically a medium truck market, which is our light and medium combined. And the US has class 5, 6, 7, and 8. If you're talking, most of them are rigid today. If we exclude China for a moment, because that's a different beast altogether, the rigid truck market, we just focus on Australia for a moment. You've seen Volvo, probably the most successful in what we call heavy rigid. These are 16-ton plus, capable of carrying 12 or 14 pallets, a range of around 250, 300 kilometres, maybe a bit more today. The technology is evolving that quickly. And you've seen some Chinese brands in the lower end of the market, around that 4.5-ton size truck, which you identify as those delivery trucks that you see. People hire a little truck to move their furniture on the weekend, that sort of size. In the grocery space, Woolworths up in Sydney, they've got 60 or 70 of those home and business delivery. Even though you've had some transport companies delivering for IKEA. There's a number of them nationally on the eastern seaboards, and they typically have a range of around 200, maybe 250 kilometres, depending on the brand. And they're Chinese, where you've got the Europeans are here. I don't think any of the Americans have come in any meaningful way yet, whether it's Kenworth or Freightliner. In the States, they've got sales going on. I haven't seen any or heard of any on the road. I was at a conference during the week and there was a big Volvo FH electric prime mover with a range, I think it was around 450, maybe 500, somewhere around there. And it's a big truck, but the applications where it can work is quite limited at the moment here in Australia. And it was interesting. Someone in the audience asked the question of the panel and asking how many electric prime movers are running out there, and they hadn't sold any. They're all rigids at the moment from that point. Fuso's done well as some of the Chinese in that light to medium duty sector. But there's some exciting developments coming. I was just looking at some scope around it. I think it was Europe. This is last year, around 7,500 trucks of all weight sizes sold by all brands, with Volvo and Renault both leading the way. Volvo and Renault is about the same parent company, actually, Volvo Group. They're leading the way. Down in the lower class section, I think Mercedes and Iveco and Renault are doing very well in that van segment. But in this truck space, we had 7,500 in Europe. It was about 2,600 trucks in the US from Freightliner, and I think it's Kenworth and the Packard organisation are the main players there. And I think also Volvo as well over in North America. And in Australia, it was about 220 trucks of all sizes, Volvo, Fuso, and a few of the Chinese like Jack Trucks. And unfortunately, some of the truck manufacturers are new to Australia and not reporting their figures through the Truck Industry Council. So it's a little bit like Polestar and Tesla removed themselves from the automotive section reporting. So you've got a situation where it might be 250, 260. It could be a bit higher. In contrast, in China, 230,000 electric trucks were sold last year. And it's just mind-boggling. And I've kept track of about 25 electric truck manufacturers in China. I've been led to believe there's over 114. And we don't see them around the world. They've gone down the battery swapping path. And in Australia, there's a very innovative, the guys at Janus Electric. They've had a bit of publicity. They've got, I think, by their official figures, almost 30 trucks on the road. They're not an OE as such. They're a retrofit, and they're getting secondhand trucks and taking out all the diesel, all your typical running technology around that, and then putting their own electric solution and battery packs, which are swappable. And they put up an ecosystem. They're a really interesting company. They're helping, we've used the term decarbonising the truck market, because the OEs are a bit behind Australia because of our uniqueness. Janus has been very proactive, and whilst they don't have the volumes of the truck manufacturers, the OEs, it's an interesting concept. But I think China was about 12% of that 230,000 were battery swappable capability trucks. And you only have to go on, people, watching this can go on YouTube and just go China battery swapping heavy truck, and you'll see it, how they work. That's because their trucks up until recently only have a range of going up to around that 50, irrespective of really the size of the truck. So it's interesting. The company that's caught a lot of people's imaginations, another brand called Windrose. So Windrose, people may be well versed in the Tesla Semi, which has a few sales in America. They don't have massive volume yet. It looks similar to that, where it's that sort of semi-bonnet truck, where traditionally North America is a bonneted truck market, Europe's purely cabo, and in Australia we have both. You think Kenworth, they do both in Australia. Volvo, they just basically these days do cabo. This is a hybrid of that, and it's based around mainly wind tunnel testing, where they cut through the air a lot better than cabos and bonneted trucks. We're seeing some direction there. And Windrose have had their truck out here in Australia on trial, and it's a semi-trailer truck, and they can do around 600 kilometres at 65-tonne B-double. Now, no other truck manufacturer in the world, probably apart from Tesla, can do that at the moment. They're all around probably 300. Although, as I said before, that aftermarket solution, Janus, I think they boast some pretty impressive numbers as well from that point of view. So the Windrose, it will be here. I think they've released it in New Zealand, and it's a centre driver position from that point of view. There's a whole lot of ergonomics around it. You're building a truck from scratch based on electric technology. You don't have all the legacy of the design of a diesel truck with an engine tunnel or a big bonnet out the front or whatever it is.
The gearbox.
It's exciting, the technology that's coming, and it's being led by the battery manufacturers at the end of the day. They're the ones who are giving us the range. You can optimize your drive line and electric motors and some great developments there. And they will get marginal increases, but the battery paddle, everyone knows CATL, they're leading the charge.
Yeah, how CATL has progressed in the last 15 odd years. It's unbelievable how quickly, and even BYD. What you are saying that Australia has 220 plus trucks that came in, and whereas China was 230,000, almost 1,000 times
In the same
right now in a year. It's a big country, a lot more engineers per capita than anyone else in the world. And that's the
Yeah, you look at cattle, and I think they've got about 8,000 engineers working on battery chemistry and battery packaging and all those things. And they hold about 7,500 active patents. And their capabilities is as much about manufacturing as it is designing and producing. They've got globally approaching 50% market share in battery, both BESS and EV. And they are just ahead of everybody from that point of view. It's interesting with the chemistry. There's been a big argument about, NMC, nickel, magnesium, cobalt. It's got those minerals that come out of Africa people don't like, makes them expensive, where China a number of years ago put a lot of their bets on LFP, lithium phosphate, and it's the dominant chemistry today. I just read a report yesterday from China. They don't even mention NMC anymore, where the Europeans and the Americans are still going down that path. In theory, NMC's got a higher energy per kilo, the density of it, so it should give you more range. There was a number of studies in cattle, one the same, and they still make NMC, but once you put the cells into a vehicle, you need more cooling for NMC chemistry. I'll keep it pretty simple, but what that means is you end up adding weight anyway, so the actual tests have shown outside of a laboratory into a vehicle, LFP and NMC have similar ranges. Now, there's a lot of high-end sports cars are still putting NMC in, and they claim to have a better range than LFP, but LFP is a lot safer technology, and I won't go into it now. Its flash points and its ability to be stable and require less cooling packaging is just far superior. If you look at China, what are they? I think up around 85% of all battery manufacturing capacity globally. And of that, it's approaching almost over 75% is LFP. Now, they're looking at sodium at the moment, but I think people should just watch what cattle do, contemporary amperes. These guys are just so clever. And then also the fundamental chemistry 101, lithium is the lightest and sodium is down there. So it will give some advantage irrespective because it is the lightest composition, right? Look, sodium, people are talking about semi-solid state batteries, and the chairman and the owner of CATL, it's come out a few times saying solid state batteries are 3 or 4 years away. We're not there yet. They're not reliable enough from that point of view. They're not lasting. They're not getting the cycle life. And that's the advantage LFP has over NMC. And this is where, generally speaking, the early model Teslas, even up to a few years ago, people were complaining that the range was dramatically reducing from when they bought it brand new down to 70%, 80%, whatever. And that's NMC. They've only got a cycle life of 1,500 to 2.5, maybe 3,000. LFP is like 6, 8, 10,000 cycle life. So they just last longer. Yeah, you've touched on people's apprehension around they have to go and buy a new battery in 3 years or 4 years for their car or truck, whatever. When it comes to LFP, they would have sold that vehicle long ago because LFP, and I'll talk about trucks, but it's the same for any vehicle, is the chances of you using that. I've used a truck as an example that's running around Melbourne or Sydney, whatever, and it's being charged every night. So basically, what do you got, about 240 odd working days? Let's just work that out, 5 days a week. So if it's charged 10 years and you've only done 2,500 charges, right? But you've also had discharges, one cycle charge, discharge. So they're starting to forecast some of these battery packs cells LFP, they'll last 10, 15 years before they get down to that accepted magical 80% of degradation. Even at 80%, your vehicle still works, right? So instead of being able to do, 500 kilometres, you might in 10 years' time be doing 380 or 400, depending how you looked after it. I've driven a few Polestar cars which have NMC, and they actually have a warning that don't charge 90% because you've got to keep in that window of 10 to 90%. So you don't actually get to use the whole 100% or even 90%. It's more like 70 or 80% compared to LFP. Where LFP, you can literally go down to 10%, charge up to 100. So you've got 90% of the
I've
available.
gone down to zero, not 1%.
Yeah, I have too, by the way. I've run it in a truck deliberately. Mine was a deliberate test. If you look at it, a lot of the apprehension and whether it's cars or trucks, it's unfounded to a lot of degree. It's as simple as that. If you're driving a truck and you want to go from Sydney and drive up to Port Macquarie, you're going to have to charge at some point, right?
And you have to rest. You have to grab a coffee or something.
We have some great safety standards globally in the truck industry, and drivers in Australia, approximately 5 hours and 15 minutes, but there's a few variances to that on how they manage their fatigue and that, the companies, but they've got to stop anyway for a half hour and have 15-minute breaks over the course. So they can put it on charge, and they're talking megawatt charging with trucks and that. So there's some interesting developments. The Windrose right now, if you've got a fast charging capability up around somewhere halfway between Melbourne and Sydney, the main freight corridor, you can do 65 tonne in a B double, pull in for a break at some point. It'll probably take you around 5 hours. You might have to stop earlier, obviously, but you can have a major break around that area. And while the guy's having a coffee and a sandwich and just resting and not working, the truck's on charge for half an hour, 40 minutes, there it gets into Sydney. So that's not far away. That's coming probably later this year, early next year from that point of view.
Yeah, especially, and then if you have battery swapping going on, then of course it's a completely different ballgame, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. First, the truck's got to have the capability to do it, right? If we put Janus to the side because they are doing it and they're on road trains and it's brilliant. But if you put that to the side, you need the ecosystem. And there's a company called Newvolt. The guys at Newvolt, they haven't built anything yet, but they're planning to open up a truck hub, charging hub, and a string of them over the next 5, 7 years, whatever, up the eastern seaboard and over to Adelaide. There's people working on solutions. They're probably a bit ahead of the game as far as we don't have the trucks yet. It's a bit like build it and they'll come. First, the OE truck manufacturers need to have them. And, the two that I look at that prime mover level is probably Windrose. They've got the solution right now. And Volvo's probably not far behind them. They just seem to be ahead of the others like Mercedes and the other Europeans. But it doesn't mean they won't catch up very quickly from that point of view.
I'm quite intrigued about the Genesis model because in this podcast platform, I actually argued at least half a dozen people who said, no, retrofit doesn't make sense. You should get a brand new. I don't know whether you had the opportunity to be in the Philippines lately. They have something called a jeepney, which is after Second World War, built on the chassis of a jeep. They built like a 15% public transport. The government has set aside almost close to $1 billion to convert this 50,000 odd thing all over the country. And a lot of people are very attached to the icon, the paint is different. So I've been arguing maybe retrofit is the best option because the technology is ready. A lot of people say, no, we chuck it in and we put a brand new box. And people say, I don't want to import a box from country X, doesn't matter how cheap that is. And it looks ugly. So do you have any thought for those?
Yeah, look, you go back, there was a company called Electric, SEA, here in Australia. I think it started, about 7, 8 years ago. And they were operating in the light and medium duty truck market, not really up in the heavy, although I think they did a few. And they managed to sell, I don't know the exact numbers, but 150, 200 trucks in Australia. And that was based on they were importing and buying Hino cab chassis, and they were initially ripping all the diesel driveline out, and they were putting in their battery packs and drive motors. Now, most of that technology came out of China, right? So it wasn't Australian made, but they sold it as a Electric. People could go to the Hino dealer and get it fixed. I think they've almost stopped doing that. They got taken over by an American company. They shifted their head office over to the US, and their whole business model in the US today is retrofitting with this. It's called XRO Technologies today. And they basically retrofit all those diesel buses, all those yellow school diesel buses you see in all the movies and TV shows, right?
Yeah.
I did see the number and it was frightening. It wasn't like a few 100,000 of these. There was literally millions of these buses in the US. And C Electric / XRO are one of about 5 or 6 companies in the US doing just that. They go and win a contract. There's lots of state or government funding in the US that helps the bus operator, which is typically the local government or the school system and that. And so that's massive at the moment, that retrofitting, like the Janus, except it's not a swappable battery. And there's a lot of that going on. I think these guys are working with Mack Trucks over there as well, something similar. I suppose in an interim step measure to full OE production where the Volvos and all the Chinese are at the moment. And the Chinese will have the solutions. They've already got them. They're 5 to 10 years ahead of everyone.
5 and 10 years ahead of everyone. I like that
Oh,
statement.
look, I believe they're probably 5 to 7 years ahead of the Europeans and the Germans and the Swedish, the French, those 3 countries. They're all very sophisticated, brilliant global truck manufacturers, but they're also cautious, no different to the automotive guys. And so where the Chinese, they've had a lot of incentives from their government and their cities were being polluted. So they had the incentives to fast track it all.
And also, they did not have any incumbent situation to protect. They're not protecting anything. They are just grabbing others' market share. So, of course, your risk appetite is very different.
Absolutely. And if you follow the Chinese truck manufacturers, we sit here in Australia in our own little bubble. They have gone out and their whole Belts and Roads initiative, they've built ports and highways in Sri Lanka. So they're now selling both the diesel trucks and hybrid and electric trucks through Asia and South America. If you look at the bus industry, it's miles ahead of the truck industry when it comes to electrification. They've dabbled in hydrogen. That's dead. Embarrassing for a lot of people. And I keep hearing these disaster stories and other companies gone under. The smart people kept away from it. The truck manufacturers all dabbled in it, knowing, no, it's going to be electric. Cars, trucks, commercial vehicles, earth-moving equipment, they've all gone down the electric path. Hydrogen is just by 1,000 cuts at the moment.
Absolutely. So, what's your view on Australia's future in terms of trucking industry getting into fully electric, now that hydrogen is out of the way?
Yeah, there's a few people still looking at it, by the way. I think a lot of people are committed, and it's been publicly disseminated in the truck media and the larger media. A company called Team Global, one of the largest, transport and logistic companies in Australia. They have operating about 60 electric trucks running around in Sydney. It was a project that was headed up by a lady called Heather Bone, and she's been the champion of electrification in our industry, without a doubt. She comes from an ESG background. They want to get rid of the polluting diesel trucks, and they've got a strategy. They built a massive refurnished a charging hub at one of their depots, and it's very successful. I think the trucks have been on the road well over a year now. They were originally part of the Toll Group and Toll split all up. They're everywhere. And Woolworths been at the head of the game. IKEA is an organisation globally. They dabbled in hydrogen over in Europe with delivery vehicles. Now, they don't own them, right? They have third-party providers, but part of the contract is we want you to go down zero-emission vehicles. And it was just a disaster for them. There's that many articles on all hydrogen failing. And whether it's China or South America or Europe, you look at buses and it's 98% are electric and 1.5% are hydrogen. People are still playing with it. And the hydrogen people will argue black and blue, but I got involved in hydrogen about 6 years ago with a company who approached me, and it's one simple question. We start to get back to the total cost of ownership. So you can buy a diesel truck at the time, gone up a little bit, but on average prime move or something like that, 350,000, something around there. Some of them 400, 450, these days 500, but something around it will just do that particular application. And they were talking $900,000 maybe $1 million. They hadn't even built any and sold any. And my view was, and I said to them at the time, is doesn't add up. It'll never add up for a transport company. You've got almost 3 times the price, maybe 3.5. And then hydrogen's proven to be very costly to maintain and operate. And the efficiency of hydrogen against diesel is less anyway. So you're going backwards. So that's why it's all falling apart globally from that point. But it's an interesting space.
And at the end of the day, hydrogen car is an electric car. You're just using the fuel as a store, which doesn't absolutely make sense. If you start with the solar, you have a kilowatt hour. Why you want to convert into something else and to get back kilowatt hour, where batteries are doing it as much cheaper, much denser, no?
Absolutely, 100%, Sahal. It's that total cost of ownership. I produced calculations. I had a calculator in that. And when you look at electric, everyone goes, oh, they're too expensive. And I just read a report this morning that I think it was one of the Australian organisations said that there's almost price parity in the passenger car market now with electric EVs and ICE vehicles in most instances. Not all, but there's price parity. One of the MGs is cheaper than a RAV4, the number one selling passenger vehicle in Australia, excluding the utes. But what I've found, and this is where the Europeans, the Americans are struggling, and a number of them are getting government funding to help with the pain point of the financial aspect, and that's in the capital cost, because the Europeans, they're about still 2.5, on average 3 times that of a diesel equivalent. So no transport company purely on the numbers can make it add up, right? Because their customers are not going to pay them 20, 30% more on their freight rates just because it's electric, unless they decide to. So they're making decisions based on, hey, we want to be good corporate citizens and all those sorts of things. The Chinese, on the other hand, they're 80% to maybe double a diesel truck. And from day one, if you're doing enough kilometres, because it all gets back to how much diesel you were burning to electric, it's either price parity or it's actually cheaper to run the electric truck. If you look at a 5-year, I used to use an example. If you've got a little box truck, 4.5 tonne, and it's doing around 50,000 kilometres a year, that's 1,000 kilometres a week, 200 Ks a day. You know, it's range, charging once a night. Your electricity costs on average being connected to your own supply at your depot, workshop, wherever you're charging, is about 1/5 of the diesel cost. So that outweighs the difference in your lease cost or your finance cost of the actual diesel truck versus the electric truck. And then you've got better maintenance. And then you start talking about productivity, which is better on an electric truck from that point of view. So it's really a no-brainer if you're looking at 4.5, 5, 6, 7 tonne for a lot of applications. Not all applications. You've got someone driving, doing 400 Ks a day, and these Chinese Fuso or Chinese brand, they have only got ranges up to around 250, maybe 300. It's not going to do it unless they charge lunchtime or something like that. And some customers can do that. Your electricity charging cost is going to be more out in the public domain. You go from maybe 34, 36 cents connected to the grid. You go there and they're charging you 60, 70 cents, 80 cents, whatever at these public charging stations. There's not many suitable charging stations at the moment in the public domain. They are out there, but there's not many. So the right applications, you don't need that. Then the customers have got running solar and they've got their own battery packs on site. And so all of a sudden, the electricity cost comes down to 4 cents, 5 cents from that point of view. Obviously, with capital investment on running, we're talking larger fleets here, it becomes hugely cost effective.
Yeah, and eventually it becomes also zero because of the zero marginal cost. You make your one-time capital investment, then you don't have to worry about the air condition, the fan belt, carburetor, radiator, and everything that else comes in. So these are huge savings. Your truck down for a couple of days is a downtime, right? So if it's electric, it's running continuously. I'm just intrigued by one factor that as more and more car becomes electric, you need people to have the skill to be able to maintain, although there is a very little maintenance involved. But at the same time, people who are holding on it, been doing it, repair for, how do we give them a new skill and all of those? This would be a very interesting challenge globally.
Yes, it's a good point, Sahal. There's a number of good organisations, TAFE organisations, got EV technician training courses. how to service. Obviously, the OE manufacturers do their own training on the electric vehicles as well. For people like panel beaters and that, they can do courses at some of these tapes, how to connect the battery from the vehicle, right? Because it's high voltage. It's 5, 6, 7, 800 volts. As I say to people, anything orange, don't touch it from that point of view. But these by design got a number of safety features to disconnect it from the vehicle so it's safe to work on the normal 12 or 24 volt electrical system running the vehicle itself. There's great organisations out there already doing that, and I'm sure more will come on board from that point of view. There are accredited courses. As I said, the OEs will do their training for their techs, retraining diesel mechanics or passenger automotive mechanics. There's a lot of good guys out there doing a great job. With a truck, you go from 5, 6 hours servicing a truck, routine service, down to maybe an hour and a half on an electric, right? That's where you get the savings. It's not necessarily all the parts, it's the actual labour time that you're saving. You're halving it, or is on the brand, right? Because certain truck manufacturers have got very short service intervals of 10, 15,000. Others have got 30 or 35. So you got to weigh it up.
And because the main component is a battery and a motor, I think eventually maybe a day will come. They say, you just take your motor, click another one in, saying, there you go, off you go, take your battery. As it becomes more and more popular. So I'm sure there will be those sort of solutions coming in.
Yeah. With the initial phase 5, 6 years ago of trucks, just literally put a large motor, which are connected to the tail shaft through a small gearbox. Now the developments have gone down the e-axle paths in the truck industry, and obviously the passenger vehicle, but in the truck, they're now incorporating the rear axles with the electric motor. So from a manufacturing perspective, it's just all bolting in very quickly on the assembly line. Obviously, it's the complexities building it in another plant. But yes, there's a brand out there in America where they've gone and designed the electric motor with each wheel hub.
The hub motors.
And so the thing can steer like a crab, right? There's, those step vans they have in the US, the typical UPS delivery vans you see, those square boxes, they're based it on that, right? So you can build any body you want, and it's all by wire, right? So each wheel and motor is driven by wire. There's no shafts, there's no mechanical linkages, and it's all self-contained in each corner of the vehicle, and they all talk to each other. It's quite phenomenal. And will that technology go into bigger trucks? Who knows?
Yeah, the way that we all have seen videos of this large BYD car, almost amphibian car. Eventually, I'm sure that's the way everything will go. And then autonomous comes in. So what's your view about the future of the whole logistic transport? Because it can be all automated, autonomous, machine charging itself, machine going in AI. Yeah. What's your view in 5, 10 years out?
First of all, the autonomous truck is not new concept. I remember back in the 1990s, Mercedes-Benz in Germany were trialing platooning, where you had one driver in the front truck, and then there's 5 or 6 other trucks following down the Autobahn, 100 kilometers an hour, 90 kilometers an hour in Germany. That's the speed limit for a truck. And they were able to follow with the technology we had back then with computers. We didn't even have the internet was just in its infancy. And then they've now got in China, they're doing the same thing, completely autonomous, no driver in the truck. They've already been testing it. There's been lots of press around the truck manufacturers. I think the cars will come first, the Teslas, the pilots and all that. When do trucks become autonomous driving down the highway? I think we're still a fair way from that. I'm not a future predictor and those sort of things. There's some interesting commentary, whether it's 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, I don't know. Will they still be building diesel trucks in 10 years? Absolutely. Will they be building in 30 years? Probably not. Somewhere around that. Who knows? We don't know governments. What we do know is between the Chinese, the Europeans, and the American automotive giants and truck manufacturers, they will probably have the race to get there. There's a company called Einride, and they've got this weird-looking truck that's driverless, and they've already started to sell them into port operations. So you're not on public roadways, and they're dragging container sculls and containers around the loading docks. I think I stand to be corrected. Dubai or Saudi Arabia have already got them working, not in mass numbers, purely autonomous. So, yeah, it's coming. We've had automated guided vehicles in warehouses for 40 years. You only have to go into a massive big distribution and even car factories. They've got these little robots running around. They used to be on tracks and they're following paint. Now they're just purely autonomous. So the technology's there. I think it's the public's perception, which is probably the scary bit that we all have to get over.
Yes, I think that's the issue. Technology may be ready. A lot of Tesla full self-driving. Yes, it's there. It can do a lot, but how many people are actually using and feeling comfortable of what using it? So what do you tell a young entrepreneur who's trying to get into this? Diesel will be gone, that we all understand somehow.
Manufacturing these vehicles?
Or electric vehicle, just to any part
Oh,
of the
gee.
value chain. Where should they go and what should they do? You have any guidance?
There's so many people already in there, Sahel. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that. You look at Windrose, okay? This is a young guy. I think he's Chinese American from that point of view. He's about 34 years of age, and about 4 years ago, he decided he wanted to build an electric truck. So he approached it in a very brief description. He approached it from like an apple. I'm going to go and design this, and then I'm going to get someone to build it for me. So he released the pictures and he's got these built prototypes, but he had truck manufacturers, one in particular in China, build it for him. And they're now producing. So he has contracted the manufacturing like Apple do. Apple don't make anything, even though we buy Apple phones and computers and all that. They contract the manufacturing side because they're brilliant at the engineering and the design and the marketing and the support once the customer's got it. But they're not manufacturers. And the manufacturers, hey, this is what we're good at. We can get all the nuts and bolts and weld things and wires and let us do that. So you've got this segregation happening. There's another brand of truck in Europe. They've had a few lives called Volta.
Yeah, I heard
It's
about
in the air.
that.
It's a rigid truck. It is, without doubt, the most innovative design truck of any type, any fuel, since Carl Benz invented the truck in Germany 100 and something years ago. It leads, you have to go and understand it and see the design principles. Unfortunately, 18 months ago, they ran out of cash, but they got reinvented again, so they're up and running again. And it is just brilliant. They made a few mistakes. They've readjusted. Their battery supply was a small battery supply, got into financial difficulty as well, but they've reinvented themselves. But its design, I hope they survive. It's just so innovative. You need to go and look at it. It's in rigid truck form, so it's a bit like the Windrose and Tesla. It's got that forward-facing sense driving control, but the safety aspects of it for pedestrians and the maneuverability is brilliant. And they contract out the manufacturing to this truck manufacturer, and they make trucks still today for MAN under contract. And so they're doing the same for Volta. Contract manufacturer. So we may see more of that as a market. If you're an entrepreneur and you're full of money, you want to build an electric car or truck, maybe you don't need to actually build it, but jump on a plane and go somewhere, and someone in China will build you the car or the truck, and you can brand it yourself and take it globally with your design. I have this conversation on a weekly basis with people, cheap Chinese. There's nothing cheap about the Chinese product. It's actually superior in quality to most of the others these days. It's just that it's got such a high scale of manufacturing that their costs are down. That's all it is. They don't have the cheap, what we call the cheap labor to build these things. The automotive industry in China is the most automated in the world. Their factories aren't full of people. It's the Americans and the Europeans have got people everywhere. The Chinese are very automated when it comes to car and truck manufacturing. Lots of robots.
Interesting, but that's not the perception you get when people talking about it, right?
That's because it doesn't suit the agenda of a lot of other people, does it? You start getting into the politics of it all in different countries and why we touch on hydrogen. Japan's been poster child for hydrogen cars with Toyota. Why? Because
Mirai.
they don't have all the raw materials for making batteries. The Europeans don't have all the raw materials. So what do? They've got to go down the hydrogen path because they don't want to be reliant on whether it's African nations or it's China or Asia. or Australia, where we produce about half of the minerals they all need.
Yeah, what's the future of Australia in all of those? We own all the minerals, a large portion of the lithium and everything else.
I'm Australian, born and bred, but we might be the lucky country. We also the silly, stupid country as well. We sell all this stuff off and it comes back to us in products. It's never too late. Why someone who has plenty of money, why don't they do a joint venture with Cattle or some other Chinese battery manufacturer and say, put a factory here and it'll be automated, right? We'll just put the raw materials into your processing plant, process it, make the batteries and away you go. We could do it. The Cattle, their new factory, it's interesting. I don't know where it is in China, but their latest factory over there is producing one battery cell a second, every second, right? From coming out. And they do the whole lot. They get the raw materials in from our places here in Australia or in their own country. And that factory, stand to be correct, was either 92 or 96% automated.
So you can just plonk it in and put anywhere in Australia and run with free solar power.
I'm sure in the future they'll have trucks, automated trucks rolling that were loaded with automated diggers, and they will take it to dump it in the big vats. It will then get processed and then it'll come out and humans won't touch it, right? Humans will be operating the computers or maybe AIs, who knows. They're not that far away from that stuff. And it's all about lowering the cost and massive volume production. There was a European, Swedish battery manufacturer and they've gone broke the second time. And I think someone's looking to buy them. Mm-hmm. And they had contracts with BMW worth $2 billion and another car manufacturer were investors in the factory. But they didn't have the know-how. They should have partnered with one of the Chinese and the Chinese would have come in and given them the know-how. They're going to clip the ticket, but they wouldn't have probably gone bankrupt. They're going to be rescued, obviously. So you got that side of it. In the US a few years ago, and I don't know this when the factory comes online, I think it's 26 or 27, Daimler, the largest truck manufacturer in the world, PACCAR and Daimler have 44% market share in the US. They dominate Freightliner products. Even it's PACCAR organization with the Peterbilt and Kenworth brands. Someone else, there's Accelera make all the e-axles. It's part of the Cummins diesel business. Those 3 or 4 companies partnered with Eve Energy, who are a Chinese company, have about 3 or 4% of the market share globally, and in China, I should say. But they're bringing in the LFP technology and how to make the batteries. And so they're the partner. It's all LFP chemistry, 100%. So that factory will feed those American truck manufacturers in the future from that point of view. But they were smart because they went and got help from the Chinese.
Yeah, if the knowledge is there, you need to bring the knowledge. This is a knowledge game at the end of the day.
And the patents, right? They got the patents and the rights.
Yeah, I remember 10 years ago when I started looking at the electric vehicle for one project. At that time, 60-70% of the patents were with Japan and Korea, but that dramatically changed in the last 10 years.
They hold more patents than anyone else put together. And as I said before, it's the manufacturing process. It's how to do it. That's why you're seeing Cattle globally are doing licensing agreements in Europe. They've even got their own factory in Germany already. And in the US, they had an agreement with Ford, and the presidents over there went and said, no, you're Chinese, you can't partner with a Chinese company. They then said, we'll build it in Mexico. And they said, we're going to put barriers. They don't want the Chinese involved in their market, and they're missing out on the technology. And China will go elsewhere. So I'd love for them to build a factory here in Australia, and we export to the Asia Pacific, and someone decides to start building electric trucks and cars. Volvo, I believe, have plans to assemble electric trucks in Brisbane at their factory there in the next few years when the volumes pick up a bit. It's exciting. It's great. They should be supported.
But yeah, a lot of economists argue that Australian economy being so small, it doesn't make sense to have a battery manufacturing and cars. But I think those fundamentally assumes a lot of people in the factory and a lot of humans, and our cost of labor is high. But if it is automated, you mentioned 96%. It doesn't matter where you are. We have free electricity. You plonk in solar and you can do gigawatt of solar for free.
We're the greatest country on earth for free energy. The sun's shining most of the time. Why don't someone in Northern Australia build the port, put it all in, The ships that come to Australia now leave half the time empty, so why not come up with it? As I said, there's some smart people with some smart money. Go for it. We could literally supply. Thailand is the Detroit of Southeast Asia. All the utes that Australians buy in Australia, Toyota, Ford, Mitsubishi, they are all made in Thailand at the Greenfield site out there. I've been out there. So you've got all those utes which make up such a large market share. At some point, they'll go electric. The Chinese are already building a battery manufacturing capability in Thailand now because Thailand's opening them with open arms. We always use the distance, and as you touched on, the labour cost. I think that's a bit of a weak way out of it.
And especially you have the Mitsubishi plant land still in Adelaide and Toyota in Melbourne, those places in Broadmeadows, they're still there. Maybe a lot of assembly lines are still sitting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, manufacturing today is so more lean and dense. You don't need massive places, but yeah, they could easily do it if they wanted to, but it's a difficult one.
Thank you so much, Grant. I learned a lot of stuff. I have to go and listen to all the references you have given. You're such a resourceful person. Is there anything else I could have asked or you want to share?
Anyone that asked me, I said, go and buy an electric car next. Unless you're towing a boat or caravan every weekend, go and, even if it's your second car, put your toe in the water. It's a media-driven, fossil fuel-driven fear campaign. And that's the sad thing, is why do they want to do that? We have children, I have grandchildren. We have to do something, right? Because no one goes and puts their face in the back of their car and breathes in the fossil fuel burning exhaust fumes because they know it's bad for them. I think the electrification, we're on the right path. There's a lot of countries that are doing the right thing. We're just so slow. We need more incentives, more, not restrictions, but we just need a game plan. And at the moment, it's very fragmented. Government funding is doing some, they're trying, right? They don't have so much taxpayer dollars. So I think it takes some courageous business people and in governments as well to make decisions, say, you know what, we need to do this. We need to see what we can electrify now. I'm involved in telematics, and there's a number of brands and companies out there, but they all have a similar tool. And there's only on passenger vehicles today where, let's say you've got 100 cars and you've got telematics installed, obviously. It will tell you that 70, 80, 90% of your fleet today, based on your driver's usage, can go electrification. They'll tell you. And then another 5%, once a fortnight he drives 700 kilometres or she does or something. So most car fleets can go to electric today, most of their fleet, and probably in 5 years, 100%. People are cautious. I think they should be jumping into it very quickly. So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sahal, thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.